Fund. So, hi. We can hear me on this here? So I was doubling up. Hi, ladies. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to chat with you all today. We had a little recap, and everybody has such important things to say. So maybe we can start by just you ladies introducing yourself quickly.
Start with me?
Yep.
Ani Bojo. Ninatut Bakshkagan mi kansan Dijnakas, Makwadodem, Thessalon Donjaba, Swakamak Donji, Asigibi Igwe Kwe Dao. I'm Helen Bobiwash, and I'm a member of the Thessalon First Nation, which is on the North Shore of Lake Huron. And I'm a mom to an 18-year-old son and to some bonus daughters that I have. And I'm a potter, a master's athlete, and professionally, in my day job, I'm an accountant. And I'm honored to be here, and I was honored to work with NACA on their Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Initiative. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Hello. And I'm Shannon Pestun. I'm from Treaty 7 territory at Calgary, Alberta, and I'm a member of the Métis Nation Region 3. I am a former banker turned accidental entrepreneur, but so grateful for the journey. And today I work on the advancement of Indigenous women's entrepreneurship in Canada, focusing primarily on financial literacy, but taking a more holistic approach to finances and the journey that women face with money and entrepreneurship. So thank you for having us, and so great to be with all of you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Gagné. I am a citizen of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. I was raised on Treaty 4 territory in Regina, but for those of you who know Saskatchewan, my family comes from more of the Cochin, North Battleford areas of the province. I work for the Clarence Campeau Development Fund, which is a Métis financial institution in Saskatchewan. And I'm a business development and community relations specialist with CCDF, and I'm also responsible for the new Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship Program.
Thank you.
Sego, hello everyone. My name's Magnolia Perron. It's so lovely to be here today. I'm the Indigenous Women and Youth Team Lead at NACA. I've been with the association for just over 2 years now and joined shortly after NACA launched its Indigenous Women's and Youth Initiative. So it's really an honor to be here 2 years later talking about supporting Indigenous women and joined by an amazing panel of successful Indigenous women. Personally, I'm from Tyendinaga, Mohawk Territory, which is located about 2 hours east of Toronto. And I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, but I do live and work on the traditional Algonquin territory here in Ottawa. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So we are among some powerhouse women who are here who are all making significant changes. We're going to talk a little bit about why this panel is important. Indigenous entrepreneurship is important, but specifically Indigenous women entrepreneurship has to be standalone. And we're going to talk about the reasons why it is. And I think it's important because I think we take it for granted that other people understand why this panel is important, but we need to share that with everyone consistently all the time. So we're just going to jump right into it. How does that sound? You good?
Sounds good.
So, and feel free to go off-roading if you think, someone else has something that you want to touch on. Please feel free, jump in. If I could, we would be in a circle here, but this is part of our circle. So, okay. So, Indigenous women are turning to entrepreneurship. We see it at Powwow Pitch. Most of the people who join Powwow Pitch are Indigenous women, and I think have been doing it without even being seen as well. So, it's sort of under the radar, whether it's, art, beadwork, all that good stuff, to provide for themselves, their families, and their community. What do you think is contributing to this growth, and what's helping them prepare for entrepreneurship? So we'll just go this way again, and we'll start with you, about 2 minutes each.
So there have been Indigenous women who have already blazed the trail for us. There have been a number who've started and we were able to see them in the communities who are successful. And then it's like when you're outside at night and you see like the murmur of birds that are flying around in formation, and that's Indigenous women. We have a number who have led the trail for us, and we're following behind them. And they didn't really have the supports available that are now, thankfully now for the women, but they really are the leaders in Indigenous entrepreneurship, and really it's them, I think anyway, that it's because of them that there are more women getting involved in business today.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I think, Indigenous entrepreneurship or innovation, it's always been part of our communities. We just didn't call it as such. I think about my own grandmother and my grandmother's grandmother and the generations before us. It was always, we lived off of the land, we bartered, we had a cashless society in many ways, but it worked. But I think that entrepreneurship is changing for Indigenous women because of programs like what NACA has, because of the commitment from the federal government. And I had the fortune of working on the 2018 strategy when the federal government stood up the women's entrepreneurship strategy, and working with Minister Ng on her panel. And the conversation was very much that we have to harness the potential of everyone. And the desire is there, the potential is there, the capability is there, but the barriers are there. And so when I think about what's encouraging more women to go into, Indigenous women to go into entrepreneurship, I think we're starting to recognize their talents. It's also a bit of reclaiming what was the way for many of our communities. And so programs like NACA, breaking down some of the access to financial capital, that social capital that we talked about as well, in terms of having that community support, that network, the network of networks. And the business environment as it is today was never designed with women in mind, let alone Indigenous women in mind. And I think that's what's opening doors now for more women to go through. So I'm excited to see where the future leads.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think we're seeing a reduction of barriers that's allowing more Indigenous women to consider entrepreneurship as an option. I know at CCDF we've seen just the past 2 years, people may have precarious work situations, and entrepreneurship is a mechanism to maybe take that step and take the economic circumstances of your family, of your community into your own hands. So I think we're seeing that a lot. We also see a lot of women just practically who are done working for other people, and they want to provide for their families, and entrepreneurship is a really exciting option to be able to do that. And then I think also we're seeing more women in entrepreneurship. I've been researching Indigenous women's entrepreneurship, particularly in the North, and what's true across lots of circumpolar countries, and Canada specifically, is we're really good at developing educational resources, or better, I guess, than some of the other needs. And even NACA's research, which I'm sure Helen will get into as well, shows that Indigenous women are accessing these workshops, these training programs. And so I think that's creating an opportunity for more Indigenous women to be equipped to feel like entrepreneurship is an option for them.
Yeah, that's really great, Victoria. And building off your point, I feel like many Indigenous women want to pursue entrepreneurship or start their own business because it gives them that flexibility and that freedom. We talk about how we know Indigenous women and women in general have more responsibilities, both community and family responsibilities. So when they're running a business, although it can be a struggle to balance both, it allows them to have that flexibility rather than a 9-to-5 kind of day job or pursuing traditional employment options. And I also think Helen touched on this earlier about having those women that are have paved the way for us. And I think we're seeing more and more role models and representation of Indigenous women in business. And I think all of you on the panel today, Sunshine, you're the founder of Powwow Pitch, Her Braids, you're one of our role models and you're increasing that representation, which means more Indigenous women and young girls in our communities can aspire to be business owners and see themselves as business owners. So I think that's, a huge thing. And just to echo what was already said around some of the supports out there and the commitments on the federal government, there's lots of tailored programs and more targeted programs now that are being developed and made available to Indigenous women. And like you said, Victoria said, women want to access that support because they see the value in it and see how it's going to help their business and help their families and ultimately their communities.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. That's very nice. And I like the point about you saying that becoming your own boss is, really that's what it comes down to, is taking control of your life and how you want to live it. I have 4 children. My work allows me to take a day when I need to bring them here or to bring them there. That is why we go, that's why this conversation is important. So the next point that I wanted to talk about, and I think it's interesting because it came up sort of organically when we were doing our pre-talk here, is about intergenerational trauma and how do we go about talking about this, and how do we go about moving forward our businesses with this happening, and which also then leads into lateral violence, which then leads into, like, it all works together, right? And we're trying to overcome this through entrepreneurship. So yeah.
So tomorrow is May 5th. It's the day for the awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited people. And I think we really need to acknowledge that Indigenous women experience a significant amount of violence, and it's intergenerational trauma is a really big part of it, but it's also trauma of our own that we carry, but also trauma that our family members might also be experiencing. And it's rooted in colonialism and racism, no surprise in this room. But I wanted to share a few stats with you. Because violence happens in institutions with people that we know, but also a large part people that we don't know. And that's unique for women, and when you look at women and violence. But Statistics Canada released a report in May 2021 that they had done some research in 2018 on intimate partner violence of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit women. And that report indicated that 61% of Indigenous women in Canada experience intimate partner violence. And then there's a study that came out in the US that was by the National Institute for Justice, and they reported that 84% of American Indian women and Alaskan Native women experience violence at some point in their life. So I just want to take a second here and just think about it. Look around you in this room. Almost 2 out of 3 women who are Indigenous who you see in this room today will have experienced statistically intimate partner violence. And if you take into account other violence from other groups, I'll say, statistically, that's even higher. So when you think about those stats, you really put faces to those statistics and look at the people that the Indigenous women who you're dealing with, just recognize that the trauma is there and we need a little bit of support because of it. So that's why, we talk about, and more in social work circles, they talk about trauma-informed approaches. I'm not an expert on it, but I know when we were developing the financial capability workbook, we really wanted to focus on that. But also I want to emphasize that Indigenous women are strong and persistent, and we just need a little bit of help to help us overcome some of the trauma that we experience in our lives. And I've just got a couple of provisions that could be made when you're dealing with Indigenous women. Safety is of utmost importance. It's physical safety, it's scheduling scheduling appointments or workshops at a time that's safe for them. You don't want to schedule something in, an urban center that ends at 9 o'clock at night where somebody has to get on a bus to go home. You also don't want to have it during the school, like when the children are home, like you want to try to accommodate some of their child care responsibilities. But also, men can be triggering. So dealing with men can be triggering. So try to offer services by Indigenous women first if you can. If you can't, by a woman if you can. And then if you need to use a man, like there's ways to still make it safe for women. Acknowledge and build on the strengths of Indigenous women. Ask them what they want. And I want to give you an example of the financial capability workshop pilot that we did in Truro last October. And it was all women who were co-facilitating, but we did have a gentleman who was going to join us to observe from CPA Canada. And we actually took the time, and Arlene Blanchard-White from Olnewig actually asked the question and said, like, we are going to have a man present, or the CPA Canada would like to have a man present, but we don't want to diminish your experience if you feel uncomfortable with a man being present. And so we asked every person in that session, are you comfortable or not? And if one person had said no, that CPA Canada rep wouldn't have been allowed to come into the session. So giving people that voice and that power to speak for themselves is really important. And I think that really goes along with, showing them that it is a safe place. Shannon?
Yeah, I mean, you covered a lot of the comments that I would have made too. And the reality is that we still face extreme violence as Indigenous women. I think the stat is 2/3 of Indigenous women have faced some sort of violent act against them. And in a lot of the work that I do too, unfortunately, it also comes out in lateral violence. And it doesn't matter where I speak, it doesn't matter what community I'm going into. When I'm sitting in a room with women, Indigenous women entrepreneurs, it comes up time and time and time again. So while we are trying to move towards or from lateral violence to lateral kindness, as many people will say, it's not that easy. And this is where I think there's conflicts in that Western entrepreneurship versus Indigenous entrepreneurship as well, because money holds so much meaning of power, which doesn't always feel right. Women always haven't had power. We take a look at some of the violent behaviors, that power has been taken away. And so the lateral violence, I think, is something that really needs to come out. We really need to be able to call out the behavior. We need to be able to really elevate one another. But you will hear comments like, you're selling our community, you're selling our culture, or you're making money off something that you shouldn't. And I think as we encourage more Indigenous women to go into entrepreneurship, a lot of them, like I think the stats from NACA and CCAB were like 73% use traditional knowledge and culture in their businesses. And so if we are not supporting the growth and the expression of this, we're going to lose a lot, and our culture will not be able to advance in a way socially or economically in the way that it could. So there's a lot to unpack in this conversation, but I'm glad that you brought that question to the table.
Thank you. I just had a conversation about this earlier back there, but we hear this in our communities. Oh, she thinks she's better than us. And what a sad thing to hear, not just for the person who it's targeted towards, but as the person saying it. Why are you saying that? You think you're beneath me because you think that you can't do what I can do, but yes, you can. And how do we create those conversations? And how do we say, yes, you can do it, let me help you? And I think having the conversations here, and then here, and then here, that's where change happens. And, we're all, everybody's here, everybody's well-dressed, everybody's here in good spirits. You have a beautiful hotel room. We are actually very privileged to be here, and when we were asked at the beginning, like, who traveled in from far, most of the room lifted up their hands, which is awesome. But entrepreneurs are often the people in community who are, they're not flying around, they're not doing this. Yes, we have people who are doing that, but we can't forget everybody in our community, right? Yeah. And so it's how to have these conversations. And so that's why I think having women panel specifically is so important and needs to be part of every financial conversation. Yep.
Yeah, and Sunshine, if I can too, and I think a lot of people say, well, why do we need these gender influenced or gender influenced areas or workshops? And this is why, because a lot of it has to come from women feeling safe with just women. beyond the broader community. So to the AFIs that are here, to those who are in economic development agencies, recognizing the importance of having gender inclusive, safe spaces, we just can't overstate the importance of that.
And then, you know, if a woman is making money on her own and she's financially independent, so if something happens in the home front, she is a little bit more equipped to leave that situation because she's not reliant on someone else for money. And so when we talk about economics and all of this stuff being a part of raising women up and, you know, closing that gap, this is why entrepreneurship and business is so important. Because we're going to get our women out of there. We're going to build their self-confidence. We're going to do all of these things through that. So did you two ladies have anything to contribute to that question?
No, I think, you know, I just echo what Shannon and Helen said, but also just, you know, as a business support officer at a financial institution, for the general managers or those BSOs there, just being very aware that money can be a triggering topic, and just recognizing the importance of this conversation and the work, the day-to-day frontline work you do with your clients is so important and so crucial in how you approach Indigenous women who are coming to you for financing.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. The only thing I'd like to add is this is something that NACA has acknowledged. And when we first launched our women's initiative, we actually built what we call a gender bias training. And part of that training, which uses the gender-based analysis plus model or framework, includes something called intersectionality, which is looking at all of those diverse factors. So when we think of an Indigenous women and some of the experiences or identity factors that maybe have helped them along the way and others that have hindered them, it really is to get us thinking as a network that supports Indigenous women in business. When they come through our doors, what do we need to take into account? And I think that's when we're talking about the trauma and the violence, that's by using that tool and applying that lens, we can be more aware and more sensitive to the needs of our women that we're trying to serve.
And I'm sure everybody has seen it, or most people, but you know, the equity versus equality and the different things. And there's a couple of them. There's the one with the fence, you know, and then there's the one with running, you know, about like between a mother and a father. So a mother in the morning is doing this to get out the door. A father in the morning is eat door. You know what I mean? And so, sorry guys, they hired me for a reason. And so that too is also part of the conversation, right?
Absolutely. And can I just add, with this intersectional approach too, it's not just the intersection of being an Indigenous women entrepreneur, but recognizing the distinct needs of that woman entrepreneur and what other factors, like Magnolia said, play. So like a woman from the north has different concerns than a woman from a south, right? So being aware of all those intersecting identities too, and not just, you know, we talk about like the problems with a pan-Indigenous approach to any solution. There's also issues with a pan-Indigenous woman entrepreneur approach to any situation. So I think that's an important point to make as well.
I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. So Helen, you were involved closely with a series of reports that NACA published on Indigenous women entrepreneurs in Canada, which include a national online survey of over 100 Indigenous women entrepreneurs. So can you tell us what some of the challenges are that Indigenous women entrepreneurs face when they're starting and growing their business?
Sure can. So in doing the research, we found actually that there was little literature on Indigenous women in Canada. There was some on mainstream or global across Canada for women entrepreneurs. There was a few research projects being undertaken regionally. The Indian Business Corporation did some as well. There was the Atlantic Policy Congress in Nova Scotia who did some, and SOCO was in the process of doing some as well. So there was a little bit that was happening, but it was all kind of at the same time. But the research, the survey that was done of Indigenous women, I'm really proud to say that we gave a voice directly to the women to tell us what they felt they needed, what their challenges were, what supports that they felt women could use in starting a business. And I just wanted to share some of the challenges as well as a couple of recommendations that came out. So this is going to surprise you. The predominant challenge for Indigenous women entrepreneurs is access to capital. Overall, like it's a challenge for Indigenous people, but it's compounded for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. So in the survey, we asked them, how did you finance your business? 3/4 of the respondents reported that they used their own savings. And then only 1/3 had indicated they were able to access AFI financing. So yay, AFIs, you're doing some good work with the Indigenous women. 1/3 of them also used some grant funding, and then another 1/3 used credit cards. So they're personal credit cards. So they weren't able to rely on outside financing much. And there's some reasons, many women have home-based part-time businesses because many have a family that they're responsible for. So they can't start anything full-time. They have to keep a job while they're starting. We heard Sunshine had done that for a while. They also accumulate less savings. Savings are required to invest in a business. And many of them have a lower income. They leave the workforce to raise their family. So there's just additional, yes, Indigenous people overall have some barriers to accessing credit, but Indigenous women entrepreneurs have greater barriers as a result of some of their roles and responsibilities in their community and family. Another challenge is balancing their family responsibilities with their business. And we asked them, which responsibilities do you have responsibilities that impact your ability to operate your business? 2/3 of them indicated that their responsibilities for children impact their ability to do business, but they also have other responsibilities, not just for their children, but for other family members, parents, grandchildren, and extended family. So they are carrying quite a lot of caregiving responsibilities for both older generations, but also newer generations. And then the last one I wanted to bring up, which is where some of the business supports are coming in from the AFIs and the Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Program, is the lack of training. That was the other big one as well, that they felt they didn't have enough training to go into business. And they identified, many of the training was identified around financial matters. And I've even heard within the pilot in Nova Scotia for the financial capability workshop, some of it was around taxes, so taxation, how do you actually access financing? But some of the non-financial topics that they were interested in learning more about was strategic planning, contract management, and handling conflicts. So those are some of the areas that they really felt they were challenged in and that they felt more support was needed. I did want to just acknowledge that the research was guided by a group of representatives from the Aboriginal financial institutions, and it's their leadership really where they said, you need to do a survey. You need to ask the Indigenous women entrepreneurs what they want and what they could really use. And it was through that leadership that we actually took the steps to do the survey, because that hadn't been planned to start. And then just a few recommendations that came out of the survey. No surprise, increase access to financing for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. And it's happening now. And with the Indigenous Women Entrepreneurship Program. And I also see smaller pockets of funding also becoming available through other private means. Develop more tools and resources specifically geared towards Indigenous women entrepreneurs to help them build on their strengths, but to overcome those challenges that they experience, involve them in the development of those tools and resources. It's also really important to involve the AFIs in the development of those resources, because a lot of them already have resources. So I think some of it is just, let's use what's existing out there and then modify it and add to it for Indigenous women to use, and make sure they're relevant to Indigenous women across Canada, which is really difficult because we can't take a pan-Canadian Indigenous women entrepreneur approach. But what we've done with the resources through NACA is we provided like a booklet that's printed, but the presentations are all of the AFIs are encouraged, change the presentations, put in photos of your clients, of people from your region, of culturally significant items that are important to your clients. And you know your clients best, so you know what's best to put in those images so that the women could really see themselves reflected in the material. And I'm really proud of it because just the pilot that we did, we really saw how women really engaged in the discussion and they shared with each other. And I just feel really good about it because all of the research, we really relied on the research that told us what works best for Indigenous women entrepreneurs, but also in the realm of financial literacy within Indigenous communities. And I can't wait to see what else comes out of this initiative. I'm no longer going to be writing anything, but it's time for other people to share their knowledge and experience. And I think if NACA can rely on people from across Canada to share what they have and their gifts with Indigenous women entrepreneurs and these resources, I just don't know where we're going to go. I think it can only be up.
Right on, yeah. I think that too, representation matters. I know everyone says it and it's a buzzword, but like really, we can't say that enough. So yeah, Magnolia, can you tell us how NACA and the AFIs are addressing the barriers and responding to the recommendations that Helen just told us about?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sunshine. So after the research project, we really used those recommendations and the challenges that were identified to guide our work going forward. And of course, as Helen mentioned, working closely with our Indigenous Women's Working Group. But we started to develop various business tools and resources, such as the financial literacy workbooks Helen spoke about, workshop content and material that AFIs could take and deliver in their communities. And we, as I spoke about earlier, built a training on gender bias for both NACA board and staff as well as AFI board and staff. And we knew from the research that many Indigenous women are starting smaller, often home-based part-time businesses, and there was a need for micro-lending. And so we worked with a number of our AFIs that had microloans in place previously that were not specific to women to help us develop a microloan program framework. And then in last year in budget 2021, we received some additional funding from Indigenous Services Canada as well as Wage Canada to help us build out an Indigenous women's entrepreneurship program that could be delivered by our AFI network. And I'm so happy to say that we have 32 AFIs participating in this program that have made the commitment, that recognize the need. Yeah, I really raise my hands to all of those AFIs for seeing the value in the program and wanting to participate. And so as I said, we have 32 all across Canada, representation in every province and territory. And with this new program, those AFIs have access to now hire dedicated business support officers. They have funding to put on workshops and training for Indigenous women, and they've been able to set up and establish a new microloan fund where women now can access funds up to $20,000 with a non-repayable contribution. And we're now building on that, and we're looking at launching a new grant and mentorship program for Indigenous women. And I just, like what you said, Helen, right? Looking to our network, looking to Indigenous women to help us build that, to figure out how do we design a grant and mentorship program, and what should that look like, or how does it need to operate within a context of supporting Indigenous women. And another thing we're doing is building a leadership training for those business support officers that have been hired within our new Indigenous Women's Entrepreneurship program, to provide them with opportunities to build their capacity to network with one another. So not just building support at the entrepreneurial level or entrepreneur level, but also at the AFI level with the business support officers, and then through our gender bias training at a more organizational level as well. And we yesterday had our first training with our business support officers, and we actually spent the second half of the day working on our grant and mentorship program and having them involved in the development and getting their feedback and input on what that should look like. So those are just a few things that we're working on at NACA that I'm really proud of, and really proud of the network for seeing the value in the program. So thank you.
Yeah, you feel it. I hear it when you talk, and good for the AFIs too. So Victoria, Clarence Campeau Development Fund is one of the AFIs who is contributing to this. Can you give us a reason as to why and how you see it benefiting Métis women?
Yeah, absolutely. So CCDF was actually one of the AFIs who had an existing women's program before this program even launched. And so it started out as a microloan program and actually grew because we saw the needs of Métis women growing as well. But the issue is that that was largely insufficient for so many Métis women entrepreneurs. Just based on the loan guidelines, it's very difficult to finance home-based businesses. And I know there's research that shows that just under 70% of Métis women own home-based businesses. So we weren't able to serve the full needs of those women, and I think that's so crucial. And part of the reason we developed our women's business development loan to start with is because we recognize those barriers that have been mentioned before, the ability to have equity in your business because women are spending it on their families and their communities, so they're not able to save to invest in their business. And I think that those barriers to women in entrepreneurship are actually the very reasons AFIs and Canada in general needs to be investing in Indigenous women entrepreneurs. You have a lack of access to equity because you're investing in your communities. So what are those businesses going to be doing once they start making money? They're investing in their communities, they're investing in their families. I have a good example of that with CCDF. We recently funded a business, an Indigenous woman entrepreneur, Métis woman entrepreneur in Saskatchewan who lost her job during the pandemic. And she realized she saw a need in the community. There's huge supply chain issues. We all experienced food security issues during the pandemic as well. And she just thought, okay, I have these skills and capabilities. How do I solve this problem? Saskatchewan has an abundance of local food. She lives on an acreage. Her neighbors are all producers. And she thought, I'm going to start a local market to solve this need, but then also to take my life back into my own hands. And so she's solving a real problem her community was facing at the time. And she's also hired multiple women who also lost their jobs during the pandemic, and she's been able to employ them as well. And that's the reason, CCDF recognized that we need to be investing in more Métis women, because Métis women, Indigenous women are elevating their communities. They're investing in their families. And so when we think about economic development, and the mission of CCDF is to improve the economic circumstances of Saskatchewan's Métis, we can't do that without Métis women. And I just think, and based on the research and having the research be led by Indigenous women entrepreneurs, we need programs that meet their needs. It can't just be about the total value of a disbursement. We need to be monitoring these programs and evaluating these programs based on how Indigenous women entrepreneurs define success, and no one else. And we need to be able to develop and deliver these programs on the terms of Indigenous women entrepreneurs and what they need and what they value. And so I think this loan program, this education program is such an excellent way to do that. We can now meet the needs of women who say, no, I want to keep a home-based business. That's what I want to do. That's what's valuable to me. And so that's one of those reasons. And the educational resources are incredible as well, and I don't want to understate that at all. It helps develop and train these women. But just based on some of the research I've done, educational resources is so important, and I think it contributes, like I said, to why more Indigenous women are getting into entrepreneurship. But educational resources don't mean anything if those women don't also have access to capital. Because great, you have this training, you're able to start this business, but if you don't have access to capital, then what are you going to do with it? And so I so appreciate NACA's approach to this, their balanced approach to it, and in meeting the needs of Indigenous women entrepreneurs on their terms. And I think CCDF recognized that and was excited to join the program.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for saying that. Business on our own terms, because I think oftentimes we're pushed. I used to go to a lot of non-Indigenous conferences, and all I hear is like scale, 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 scale. Okay, well, maybe you want to scale, but I want to take care of my children and I want to do it comfortably. We don't want to live in poverty by any means. However, this is where I want to be. And I think that we have to leave it up to the people who are doing it to make that decision on their own and not impose it and say, well, how much are you growing? Well, your definition of success and growth looks a heck of a lot different than my version of it. And so, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you for saying that. Okay, Shannon, you've been working to close the critical gender gaps in entrepreneurship and in the financial services sector. Can you share with us what you've learned about what it takes to have an intersectional approach and use a gender-based lens in business finance?
I don't even know where to start with that question, but I'll give it a go. I think I just want to sort of transition off the last thing you said, and it really is about decolonizing entrepreneurship. And one of the things that I have learned working with Indigenous entrepreneurs is that for a lot of women, they're not starting a business because they're like, oh, I want to create a whole bunch of widgets and sell these widgets around the world. There's a need in their community, there's a need for their child. I think about Patrice Mousseau of Sachi Organics, whose daughter had eczema and created a cream, and then the next thing you know, she's giving it to her, to her neighbors, and now she's in 1,000 retail stores across the country. Or a Jennifer Harper who, wanted Indigenous youth to be seen, so she created Cheekbone Beauty, and now she's, she's got venture capital under. Actually, she doesn't have venture capital under her. I think she might just have grown through some debt and through some grants as well. But she was on Dragon's Den, but I think she did not take the deal now that I say that. So, I mean, having said that, what I've learned about an intersectional lens is when I think back about my banking career, and I was leading the women's banking strategy for the institution that I worked at. And I remember creating a crowdfunding campaign because I'd gone through some research that said crowdfunding is the only financing source where women were outperforming men. I thought, awesome, we've got a crowdfunding platform at the bank that I worked at. Let's try something for women. And I was so excited because I had done a whole call for Indigenous women to come forward to be part of this campaign. And we talked about the intersectionality. So if women have a hard time getting access to capital, now I've just encouraged a whole bunch of Indigenous women to come through, and only one was successful. Now in crowdfunding, you basically appeal to a market. People like you and you and you and all of us can donate, or not donate, but can give money to a financial contribution to the campaign. And if that funding goal is met, there's an exchange of value somewhere. It's defined differently depending on what kind of crowdfunding. But I realized really quickly where my mistake was in my thinking was I didn't account for the fact that the Indigenous women didn't have the same community that a lot of the white women who were participating in the campaign did. They didn't have people that could just pull out $1,000 here for my business, or, so right away there, in the interest of trying to solve something, a gender lens only, that was a learning by mistake. But also, I think because of the way that women go into their businesses, the reason we have to take such an intersectional approach is because lived experience tells us how we're going to show up in our businesses. And this is a part that we don't talk enough about. But I see it all the time when it comes to pricing, particularly for women who are in service-based businesses. They don't know how to price themselves. And so when you grow up, and let's talk about the trauma of money for a second, but let's talk about maybe you grew up poor. Maybe your first money memory was something horrifying, or you heard messages from your parents saying, well, we can't afford that, or I'm going to make your clothes because I'm not paying that kind of money. You carry this with you in your life. And now in front of you, you have the opportunity to become economically self-sufficient, move forward in a business. And the first thing that you do is you put a price tag on yourself that is way undervalued. And we talk about financial literacy. It's not just about here's what a balance sheet is, here's what an income statement is. Financial literacy is really about understanding the lived experiences, our behaviors, our attitudes, our thoughts, and our skills and our competencies, and bringing it all together. So when I think about an intersectional approach to all of this, it's so personal. Whoever said business isn't personal has never owned a small business. It's entirely personal. Yes. We take personal risks, we take financial risks, But we have to really understand the person that's in front of us. And this is the beauty of the Aboriginal financial communities. I know so many other the banks are trying to do. I see Monica James here from BDC, who's doing a great job with the Indigenous market at BDC. We really have to listen to the story, to the entrepreneur, because there is always more than just the business. And as we ask different questions and we get to know the entrepreneur, we will build a better story. And I just want to encourage all of us who have control over these purse strings to realize that we do have that power. So, taking an intersectional lens, please just get to know the entrepreneur across from you, particularly the woman who for the very first time might be seen for the first time by someone sitting across from her. So I will say that.
Yep. And I also think, to add on to that, I think when you say things like financial literacy, and to be honest, even the word business, it kind of sounds like womp womp, like boring. I don't like what. However, it absolutely doesn't have to be. And I think because when you think of that, you think of financial literacy as spreadsheets, like you say. But I used to take courses like that, and one person talked about reverse engineering it. So basically, what do you need to live? So not you as a business, but how much do you need to survive? Yeah. And then figure out how many, in my case at the time, it was baby moccasins. So how many baby moccasins do you need to make? And then take off the cost of the leather and when you make it personable and fun and real, this changes everything. And it's a shift in that. So that was my tangent, but I think it's important that something you said, and financial literacy is the base as well to get everybody to the level where they can come to AFIs and be prepared to get help through the AFIs. And I also think it's important, I think probably most of you all know this, but you can't go to a bank, especially if you live on reserve, and just go get a loan for your business. I am so high risk. I think I'm probably less high risk now based on I don't know, my track record, the bank account, whatever. However, Indigenous women, I would say most of them would be petrified to go to a bank and ask for a loan or the regular model. So I think that there's so much power that the AFIs have to create this change, to be safe, to say, yes, we see that you can't go to a bank and get $5,000, $10,000. It's not a lot of money to be able to do that. And so you guys are all in that position to be able to do this for your communities, super powerful. Thank you. Yep.
Can I just add something? So with respect to the term financial literacy, I agree that it's not the best word to use, and we just don't, it's really hard really to come up with all of the concepts involved that are financial in one word. Yeah. And I know AFWA Canada, they use the term financial wellness because it really is impacting your wellness. With the workbooks, we call them financial capability workbooks because it's more about your capability within finance. But even then, it's just really hard because we're trying to colonize something again, right? And where I've had some conversations with people in the communities, and I've let's try to find something that's more culturally appropriate. I've had some discussions with some people in Wikwemkong, which is in Manitoulin Island, and they're Anishinaabe speakers. And I asked them, I said, how would we describe, or how would we use the language to describe, using your money and making decisions with money that helps you to meet whatever goals you have, whether they're financial, whether they're familial, or other aspects of your life. What word would you use? And she actually went back to some of the other language speakers in her community, and she came up with the word bimodzuin, which is used a lot in health circles because that's, again, is the good life, right? That you're using money for a good life. And I like the idea, but it's used so much for health that I wouldn't want to confuse it with health. So within the Anishinaabe, there's also Kendoswin, which is the way of knowing, and how you learn is everything. It's not just somebody talking to you, it's observing everything around you. So that's kind of been a
Maybe you could
journey.
do that in your powwow competition. Have like a call for
Yeah.
a better term for financial literacy.
So I think within each AFI even you could find out what would be more culturally relevant to your region and to the people that you're working with. What's a better word to use when you're talking about financial literacy? And myself, I just kind of break it down and I'll just say, okay, let's talk about preparing a budget, or let's talk about going to see your bank. But it's really hard when you're trying to come up with, use a broad, a term for a broad concept.
Mm-hmm. And really, at the end of the day, it's just a tool to get you what you want or what you need, in which case, and then we talk about food, like housing, all that stuff. But then once you've established and you've reached all of these, the criteria for living, then you're talking about, okay, so now I would like to have a podcast. Well, what do you need for a podcast? So the money itself is just the tool to get you what you need to, or what you want to do, right? So yeah, I think these discussions are important too. So before we wrap up this panel, I'd like to hear each of you hear from what do you see for Indigenous women entrepreneurs? What do you see lying ahead? Let's start with you, Helen.
I've been thinking about this question for the last week, and the answer keeps changing. But I want to go back to that analogy of the starlings that are flying in the sky at night, and what I want to see is more starlings flying together. And it's beautiful to see that formation where they're following each other, and they're just so agile, and they move really quickly. And I want that for Indigenous women. But on a practical side, I can't just talk about analogies. We need more research, to revisit the survey that we did and get more women to participate, because that will give us a greater voice for women. And I really feel like we need to provide some targeted efforts toward Métis and Inuit women, because they were underrepresented in the survey. And I know in a lot of things that you try to do like nationwide, that there isn't as much representation amongst Métis and Inuit, because everything seems to be First Nation centric. So let's change it. Let's put some targeted efforts out there. So that's, I think, is really important. I do want to mention that NACA and the AFIs did set a target for themselves of increasing the number of Indigenous women entrepreneurs accessing AFI financing by 50% by the year 2025. I want to see year 2025 AFI stand up and say, we not only met our goal, we exceeded it, and we're going to increase our target for the next 5 years. And when I did the research, I felt it was really important to put a target on it, because if you don't measure it, you don't know if it's actually going to happen. So that's why I was really insistent on having some kind of target. And the AFIs and NACA were really supportive in that 50%. And then the last thing, I really wanted to just also talk about another group of people who are marginalized amongst our communities and who are affected by gender issues as well. And that's the LGBTQ two-spirited people. They have something to give to our communities, and it's been lost with colonization, and they really have gifts that they can use within their own businesses, and they are very entrepreneurial. And I really feel that we need to start looking to that community in our own communities as well, and see how can we support them too, and how can they, it's to build on their strengths and their entrepreneurial resources that they already have, to just support them to be successful in business, because it takes making that commitment to see the change. And the commitment was made for Indigenous women entrepreneurs, and now let's see what can happen with LGBTQ and two-spirited people sometime in the near future.
Well said.
Yeah, I think you said it great when you said that what gets measured gets done. So we really need the data. But I also think that, my hope is that one day we don't have to say, I'm an Indigenous woman entrepreneur. that we'll just be able to say, I'm Shannon, and we don't have to put the woman or the Indigenous in front of the word entrepreneur. I still think there's so many stereotypes that we need to overcome about like what is an entrepreneur, what is success, and breaking some of that down. But my hope for the future is that when we think about the financial world of this, it's not just reliant on the AFIs to get the money into the hands of Indigenous people, that we start seeing more collaboration in the traditional financial streams, and even some of the alternative, whether it's crowdfunding or venture capital, that we start to see the whole funding system make sense for different types of businesses, and for us to really challenge some of the credit narratives and challenge the way that we review files. I'll just give a very small example, but you had mentioned that most women will use their credit cards. And we'll just think about the implication. This is just one small example, but if I'm a woman buying for my household, we know that women are a multiplier. There's a multiplier effect with the buying. But if my credit card is high, because I'm using it to buy everything for the household, my credit score actually starts to go down. So there are so many things in the system that just don't make sense. And what we need to also say is it's not for the women entrepreneurs to change. It's for the system to change and say how it's designed does not meet the needs of who's in the market today and who's showing up as entrepreneurs.
Yep.
I think for myself, as I think about Indigenous women's entrepreneurship going forward, it's kind of twofold. So maybe I'll talk to the non-Indigenous organizations in the room and the government officials for a second, and just state that, we talked about the lateral violence and the importance of safety for Indigenous women entrepreneurs in programming. That's why AFIs are so necessary, because I think in the ecosystem in general, you see a lot of Indigenous programming coming out, but it needs to be run by Indigenous women, or Indigenous organizations, and it needs to be led by Indigenous women if it's going to be effective for Indigenous women. So I think that's something that's really important, and I hope more organizations think about that as they look to develop Indigenous entrepreneurship, Indigenous women entrepreneurship strategies as a non-Indigenous organization. There's a lot of great work happening. NACA's done fantastic work, and the AFIs are getting on board. Look who you can partner with, what work is already happening, and support those initiatives, I think. And then second, I think the gender bias training is so important, and going back to that intersectional lens, and not just, like I said, with Indigenous women's entrepreneurship, but also myself. We all have implicit bias. So as a Me Too woman serving Me Too women, I'm also very aware of the fact that I grew up in the South. And so am I learning and undoing implicit bias that helps me better serve women in the North or Northern and remote communities. And I think that also ties into the equity conversation we had, and what I kind of hope to see for Indigenous women's entrepreneurship in this programming going forward. And I'm very aware that it's difficult to do, but the truth of the matter is a microloan in the South is not the same as a microloan in the North. And we need to be able to account for those different intersecting needs of Indigenous women entrepreneurs where they're at, and account for those differences so that we're approaching these programs equitably as well for all Indigenous women, and especially Northern and remote Indigenous women entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
Thank you all for those comments. I feel like I have a really clear direction on what I need to do in my role, and I feel very privileged to be in the role I am in at NACA and get to work on such an exciting initiative and work with colleagues that are so knowledgeable. And I feel like with my privilege, it's not even a privilege, but a responsibility I have to respond to what you all are saying today. But also to all the other Indigenous women. And I love, Helen, what you're saying about the need to redo the research. That's a snapshot in time. And when we talk about monitoring the success, we need to continue to research and get that feedback from Indigenous women to know, are we achieving what we set out to achieve? As you mentioned, our goal is to increase lending by 50% by 2025. And I was told yesterday it was a lofty goal, but I said, well, no, we had 4 AFIs that had a specific women's program before we launched this. We now have 32, and based on the applications we receive, we anticipate that we'll issue over 800 microloans in the next 2 years, and we'll issue and provide over 300 grant and mentorship opportunities. But the work doesn't end in 2 years. So my vision is that the programming continues on beyond the 2 years. And as you said, Shannon, right, hopefully we'll get to that point where we don't need a gendered program, but we're not there yet. And until we've reached what you said earlier, Sunshine, when we talk about equality versus equity, you know, equality is everyone being treated the same. But equity is meeting people where they're at and providing them with the tailored and targeted support. And it's a means so that we can reach equal inequality. So I hope that one day we'll be there. And in our research, input from 115 Indigenous women, their vision was that they want to have businesses that reflect their culture and values, that meet their families' needs and lead their communities. And I hope that through our Indigenous Women's Program and through other initiatives out there outside of our network, that hopefully we'll be able to achieve that. And I know we spoke about the importance of, you know, that lived experience. And I think that's why with our women's program, it was so important that for those business support officers that we were putting in place, that we brought in Indigenous women to take on those leadership roles, because we need to affect change at every level. So I'm really excited with our program. I'm really excited to see what's to come and to work with all of you over the next little while to help achieve our shared goal. So thank you.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. I learned, every time I'm on a panel or listening to a panel, I learn so much. I thank you all for sharing your expertise, your passion, your mission, and you're not just sort of talking the talk, you're walking the walk in the things that you are doing. And that's super inspiring. And I can't wait to work with all of you in the future as well. I believe we have a couple of minutes left. Do we? Sure. Who's going to say no when I'm up here? I dare you, Andre. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap it up? Anybody? Hopefully it's a man asking a question. No?
Oh, I see we have one.
Oh, we do.
We have one.
Yay! Oh, hey! He gets a cheer.
I'd just like to congratulate the women entrepreneurs. I'm from Northern Manitoba, and I'm the executive director. I oversee and manage numerous businesses. And one of the questions that I'm asked is why are you so successful? And I tell them, I said, if you take a look at the businesses that we have, the majority of them are managed by women. All right. I said, because us men, we tend to do things half-ass. Women are more detailed. So, congratulations.
Thank you, Miguel. Okay, I think that's it for us. We're done. It's because I have no idea the time. I forgot my phone right there. It's very far away from me. Oh, we have one more. Yay.
I was going to take up the man challenge, but I was beaten to it. But that's okay. I want to tell a bit of a story about my first call as an AFI manager in regards to a women's only program. I don't know if this was the program, but I do remember maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, I got a call to my office asking if there were going to be a women's only fund, would our AFI be interested in delivering such a fund? And our answer to that was hard yes, right now. The next question that came to me was, are we willing to reduce the requirements in which we named for a women's only program? And my answer to that was no. And the person calling, I don't recall who it was very surprised. And I had said, why do we think that we need to reduce the standard under which someone would qualify for a program because it's a woman entrepreneur buying? I don't think that's the case. My view at the time was, what we do there is we carve out a certain amount of dollars for women entrepreneurs, and that way they had access to capital because there was a fund specifically that would be used by Indigenous women, which is also want to talk about, there was a quick discussion about the differences in the microloans depending on where you are in the country and the cost of those. And I will tell everybody that has significantly been addressed already. I know when the two young ladies in our office was doing the application with Magnolia in regards to this program, one of the things that they were very concerned about was if we were going to do workshops in the remote part of the NWT, the cost of doing that workshop was significant. The cost of getting 6 to 8 women to the workshop in some of those communities would have been bigger than the entire budget to do the entire workshop. And I think we were a day and a half getting confirmation from Magnolia and her team of people putting it together that whatever that cost is, depending on where we are and what we have to do to make that program work, those scales, those economy of scales would change to make sure that those things were happening in the places where there was a need for additional dollars. But congratulations to everybody. I think it's going to be a great program. If you apply to our office, you will not have to talk to me. There are two young ladies that are probably much better equipped to do that than I am. But just congratulations, everybody. I think it's going to be a great program.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you very much, ladies.
All right, that was awesome. So just a bit of housekeeping before the next